March 17, 1945. The truck lurched over a pothole, and Oberhelferin Margaret Hoffman grabbed the wooden bench beneath her to keep from sliding into the woman beside her. Through the canvas flap at the back of the transport, she caught glimpses of American countryside. Flat farmland, bare trees just beginning to bud, a white church steeple in the distance. 47 other women swayed with the truck's movements, their faces gray with exhaustion and fear. "Where do you think they're taking us?" whispered Greta Muller, the signals operator who had been captured alongside Margaret 3 days earlier in the confusion after the Rhine crossing. Margaret pressed her face closer to the gap in the canvas, trying to see. "I don't know. Somewhere inland, away from the fighting." She had expected beatings, perhaps starvation. The propaganda had been clear about what happened to German women who fell into enemy hands. For 2 days they had been processed through a temporary facility near the front lines. Photographed, fingerprinted, interrogated in halting German by young American soldiers who looked barely old enough to shave. The treatment had been professional, almost bureaucratic, but Margaret kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. The truck slowed, and she heard voices outside, American English she couldn't fully understand. Greta clutched her arm. This is it. But what exactly was it supposed to be? The canvas flap flew open, revealing a young sergeant with red hair and freckles across his sunburned nose. "All right, ladies, everybody out. Slow and orderly, please." His German was serviceable, though his accent was thick. "Welcome to Fort Custer." Margaret climbed down first, her legs stiff from the journey. Her boots hit packed dirt, and she straightened to survey her new prison. What she saw made her stop so abruptly that Greta nearly collided with her from behind. The compound stretched before them, but these were not the crude wooden barracks she had steeled herself for. The buildings were substantial, brick and wood construction with real windows, glass intact and gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Gravel paths connected the structures in neat geometric patterns. In the distance, she could see women walking between buildings, not in chains or under guard, but simply walking. Some were laughing. "This feels wrong." "Keep moving, please," the sergeant said, not unkindly, gesturing toward the nearest building. "Processing first, then we'll get you settled." Inside the administration building, Margaret and the other women formed a queue. The room was warm, heated by radiators that clanked and hissed. An American corporal with dark hair sat behind a desk with a clipboard and what appeared to be stacks of new clothing. Clean clothing. "How did you become so proficient in our language?" Margaret asked when it was her turn, surprised by the woman's fluent German. The corporal looked up, her brown eyes sharp but not hostile. "My grandmother came from Heidelberg." "Name and rank, please." "Oberhelferin Margaret Hoffman. Signals Auxiliary, Wehrmacht Communications." The corporal made notes on her form, then stood and walked to the clothing stacks. She returned with 2 dresses, undergarments, stockings, and a pair of low-heeled shoes. "These should fit. There's a shower facility through that door. You'll be assigned to Barrack 7. Any medical concerns I should note?" Margaret stared at the clothing in her arms. The dresses were simple but new, cotton prints in blue and green. The stockings had no runs. No medical concerns." "Good. Dinner is at 1800 hours in the mess hall. Follow the other women. They'll show you the way." The corporal was already looking past her to Greta. "Next, please." The shower facility was tiled in white ceramic, spotlessly clean. Steam rose from the stalls where the first women to be processed were already washing. Margaret undressed slowly, folding her dirty Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform with automatic precision despite her confusion. When she stepped under the hot water, she gasped. Hot water, clean soap that smelled of lavender, thick towels waiting on hooks outside the stalls. Around her, the other women were silent at first, too stunned to speak. Then someone started crying, not from fear or pain, but from something else entirely. Relief, perhaps, or the overwhelming cognitive dissonance of kindness where cruelty had been promised. Barrack 7 housed 60 women in 2 rows of bunks, each with a thin but clean mattress, 2 wool blankets, and a pillow. Margaret's assigned bunk was on the lower level, near a window that looked out on a small courtyard. The woman in the bunk above was already there, reading a book by the light of an electric lamp clamped to the bed frame. "First day?" she asked in German, looking down with a wry smile. "Yes, I'm Margaret. Anna Brecht, former nurse, Hamburg." Anna swung down from her bunk with practiced ease. She was perhaps 30, with dark blonde hair cut short and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You'll get used to it, though I suspect it takes everyone a few days to believe it's real." "What is real?" Margaret asked. "What is this place?" Anna gestured around the barracks. "A prisoner of war camp for German women, auxiliaries, nurses, some civilians caught up in combat zones. We're processed through here, classified, and eventually most are sent to work camps. Farm labor, mostly, or light industrial work to help with the war effort." She paused. "But while we're here, they treat us according to the Geneva Conventions. Better than the conventions, honestly." Before Margaret could respond, a bell rang somewhere outside. "Dinner," Anna said. "Come on. You'll want to see the mess hall." The dining facility was larger than Margaret had expected, with long tables and benches that could seat perhaps 200. The serving line moved efficiently, American soldiers behind the steam tables, white-aproned German women working alongside them. Margaret accepted a tray and watched in disbelief as her plate filled. Roasted chicken, real chicken, a full quarter of a bird, mashed potatoes with butter melting into them, green beans seasoned with bacon, a roll still warm with another pat of butter, an apple for dessert. Is this standard?" she asked Anna, who had guided her through the line. "Daily. Sometimes the meat is pork or beef. Sundays they do a roast. There's coffee or milk to drink, real coffee, not ersatz." Anna found them seats at a table where several other women were already eating. "Everyone, this is Margaret. Arrived today." The introductions came quickly. Liesel, a telephone operator from Munich. Frieda, a document courier from Berlin. Helga, a factory worker who had been in the wrong place when the Americans overran her town. All of them had the same story, terror at capture, followed by profound confusion at what they found. "They let us write letters," Liesel said, cutting into her chicken. "Once a week. Censored, of course, but they go through the Red Cross to German POW camps. My brother is in Texas, also a prisoner. He says his camp is similar. We have a library," Frieda added. "Real books in German and English. There's even a woman who teaches English classes twice a week if you want to learn." Margaret ate slowly, savoring each bite, but her mind was racing. "Why?" The question hung in the air. Helga, who was older than the others, perhaps 45, set down her fork. "That's what we all ask. I was at Ravensbrück before the war ended." She said the name of the concentration camp quietly, and the table fell silent. "I wasn't a prisoner there. I worked in the town nearby, but we all knew. We all heard things." She looked directly at Margaret. "This is what civilization looks like. We forgot." The words hit like a slap. Margaret wanted to protest, to defend something, but she didn't know what. She had never been party member, never supported the extremes, but she had served nonetheless. They all had. "There's a church service on Sunday," Anna said, breaking the tension. "In town at the Baptist church. They let us attend if we want to." Margaret's fork clattered against her tray. "They what?" "Every Sunday morning. A bus takes anyone who wants to go into the town. Battle Creek, it's called. The local churches open their doors. You sit with the American congregation. They share their hymnals. Under guard. There's a guard on the bus, but once you're in the church." Anna shrugged. "Where would we run? How would we run? We're thousands of miles from home, in the middle of a country at war with ours. But more than that." She paused, searching for words. "They trust that we're human beings who keep our word. If we say we'll come back to the bus after service, we come back." Margaret pushed her tray away, her appetite suddenly gone despite the full plate. "I don't understand any of this." "Neither did I," Anna said gently. "Give it time. 2 weeks into captivity. The routine of Fort Custer became familiar with surprising speed. Reveille at 0600. Breakfast at 0630, always oatmeal or eggs, always fresh bread, always real coffee. Work assignments from 0800 to 1600, with an hour break for lunch. Dinner at 1800. Lights out at 2200, though the guards didn't enforce it strictly if women wanted to read or talk quietly. Margaret had been assigned to the laundry facility, where she worked alongside 8 other women washing linens and uniforms for the camp. The work was hot and monotonous, but the facility itself was modern electric washing machines, heated water, proper drying racks, and irons. The American sergeant in charge, a woman named Williams who spoke no German, communicated primarily through gestures and a patient smile. On her 15th day, Sergeant Williams brought in a radio and set it on a shelf where everyone could hear it. American music played throughout the day. Big band jazz, crooning singers, upbeat melodies that seemed almost obscenely cheerful given the war still raging across the ocean. During their lunch break, sitting in the small courtyard behind the laundry, Margaret voiced the question that had been building. "Anna, what happens when the war ends?" Anna was darning a sock, her needle moving with practiced efficiency. "They've told us that POWs will be repatriated eventually. Could be months, could be longer. Germany will need to be stabilized first." She tied off her thread. "Some women are being offered work placements with American families. Domestic help, agricultural work. Paid positions, though you stay technically classified as a POW. Would you take it?" "I don't know what I'm going back to. Hamburg was bombed heavily. My family." Anna's voice trailed off. "I might not have a home to return to." Liesel, who was peeling an apple with a small knife, spoke up. "My aunt lives in Chicago. She emigrated in 1931. I wrote to her through the Red Cross and she wrote back. She's trying to sponsor me for a visa after the war ends. The Americans said they'd facilitate it if she can prove relationship and financial stability." The casual revelation shocked Margaret. "They would just let you stay? After the war? Why not?" Liesel shrugged. "I'm a telephone operator, not a Nazi. I never joined the party. I just worked the switchboards because that's what young women did for the war effort. The Americans aren't interested in punishing people like us. They're after the real criminals." Frida, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I joined the party in 1938 when I was 17. My father made me. He said it would help me get a government job." She stared at her hands. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what it all meant." Anna reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "None of us knew everything, and those who did know, well, speaking up meant death." She looked at Margaret. "Are you going to church this Sunday?" Margaret had been avoiding the decision. "I haven't been to church since before the war. Neither had most of us. But it's something to do, something normal. And the Americans." Anna smiled slightly. "They're very earnest about wanting us to see their way of life. It's almost charming how much they want us to understand that democracy and human rights actually exist." "Is it propaganda?" "Of course it's propaganda. But propaganda that's also true is just called reality." Sunday, April 1st, 1945. The bus left at 0800. A repurposed school bus painted olive green, but still showing traces of yellow underneath. Margaret sat near the back with Anna, watching as 37 other women filed aboard. The guard was young, maybe 20, with a wedding ring on his left hand and a rifle that he held loosely, pointed at the floor. Battle Creek rolled past the windows. A small American city, neat and prosperous despite the war. Houses with front porches and yards. Shops with glass windows still intact. People walking on sidewalks, going about their Sunday morning routines. A few looked up at the bus, but without obvious hostility. Curiosity, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement. The First Baptist Church was a white wooden building with a tall steeple and arched windows. The bus pulled into the gravel parking lot, already half filled with automobiles. Real civilian automobiles, not military vehicles. "Remember," the guard said in careful German, "you represent yourselves and your country. Be respectful. Be honest. The bus leaves at 1100 sharp, and you will be on it." They filed off, a column of women in borrowed dresses and donated shoes. Margaret's heart hammered as they approached the church entrance. An older American couple stood at the door as greeters, the man in a dark suit, the woman in a floral dress and hat. "Good morning," the woman said warmly in English, then switched to heavily accented German. "Welcome. Please, come in." The sanctuary was beautiful. Polished wooden pews, stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes, a pipe organ at the front. The American congregation was already mostly seated, and they turned to look as the German women entered. Margaret waited for disgust, for anger, for rejection. Instead, people stood and gestured to empty spaces in their pews, inviting them to sit. A young American woman, perhaps 25, touched Margaret's elbow and smiled. "Here," she said in English, pointing to an empty spot. When Margaret hesitated, the woman simply took her hand and led her to the pew, then sat down beside her. The service began with a hymn. The congregation rose and Margaret rose with them. The young woman beside her opened her hymnal to share, "Holy, holy, holy," and pointed to the words. Margaret knew the melody. They sang the same hymn in Germany, "Heilig, heilig, heilig." Around her, in a church in Michigan, surrounded by the citizens of a country she had been taught to consider the enemy, Margaret sang about the glory of God. The young American woman beside her had a clear soprano voice. An older man across the aisle sang bass with gusto, slightly off-key. 3 rows ahead, Margaret could see Anna standing beside an American family with 2 young children. The pastor preached in English, which Margaret couldn't follow completely, but his tone was gentle, thoughtful. She caught words here and there: love, forgiveness, peace, hope. After the sermon, he said something that made the congregation nod. Then he switched to German, reading haltingly from a paper. "We are all God's children. In times of war, we forget this. Today, we remember together." The young woman beside Margaret was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks. She noticed Margaret looking and whispered in halting German, "My brother, killed in France. January." She gestured to the German women. "But still, we are all God's children." Margaret felt her own tears rising and couldn't stop them. After the service, the congregation gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and cookies. The American women approached the German prisoners with a mixture of curiosity and determined friendliness. Coffee was poured. Cookies were offered. The older woman who spoke some German from her childhood became an impromptu translator, facilitating halting conversations between former enemies. "What is your name? Where are you from? Do you have family? Can we write to you?" The questions were genuine, human. The Americans weren't pretending there wasn't a war, weren't denying the horror and loss. They were choosing, deliberately and consciously, to see the women before them as human beings first. On the bus ride back to Fort Custer, the German women were mostly quiet, processing what they had experienced. Anna broke the silence. "They didn't have to do that. The guards could have just let us sit in the camp on Sunday mornings. It would have been easier, simpler, safer." "So why did they?" Margaret asked, though she thought she was beginning to understand the answer. "Because," Anna said slowly, "they actually believe the things they say, about human dignity, about rights, about civilization." She looked out the window at the passing Michigan countryside. "We used those words too back home. We talked about culture and civilization and destiny. But this," she gestured vaguely, "this is what it actually looks like when you mean it." 3 months later, the war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The news spread through Fort Custer within hours. Someone's radio picked up the announcement, and soon everyone knew. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich was finished. Margaret sat on her bunk that evening, staring at nothing, trying to process what it meant. Home was gone, not in the physical sense necessarily, but in every sense that mattered. The country she had served, however reluctantly, had ceased to exist. What would rise from the ashes was unknown. "There's going to be a special assembly tomorrow," Anna said, climbing up to her bunk. The camp commander wants to address everyone. The assembly was held in the mess hall, all 343 German women currently at Fort Custer crowded into the space. Colonel Morrison, the camp commander, stood at the front with a translator. He was a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. "Ladies," he began, waiting for the translation, "I want to inform you of the current situation and your status going forward." He explained that the war against Japan continued, but that the European theater had concluded. The processing of German POWs would accelerate now. Repatriation would begin within months as conditions in Germany stabilized. However, there would be complications. Germany was divided into occupation zones. Many areas had been devastated. The logistics of returning hundreds of thousands of prisoners would take time. "In the meantime," Morrison continued, "you will remain here under the same conditions as before. Those who wish to work may continue their work assignments. Those who prefer to wait may do so. We will continue to provide for your needs and safety." Then he paused, and something in his expression shifted. "I want to say something personally, not as a commander to prisoners. I have read the reports coming from Germany, the camps that have been liberated, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, the photographs, the testimonies, the evidence of what occurred there. The mess hall was absolutely silent. I do not hold you individually responsible for these atrocities. Most of you are young women who served in auxiliary capacities, who followed orders, who likely had little knowledge of the full scope of what was happening." His voice was steady but firm. "But I want you to understand why we have treated you as we have. We chose to follow the Geneva Conventions not because you deserved it, but because we believe in the principles those conventions represent. We fed you well and housed you decently not because you earned it, but because that is what civilization requires of itself." The translator's voice shook slightly as she rendered his words into German. "What happened in those camps, what your government did in your name, was the complete abandonment of human dignity. It was evil. There is no other word for it." Morrison's gaze swept across the room. "We wanted you to see what the alternative looks like. We wanted you to experience what it means when a society actually values human life and human rights. Not because we're perfect, we're not, but because we try." He let that sit for a moment. "When you return to Germany, you will face a reckoning. Your country will have to reckon with what it did, what it allowed, what it became. That process will be painful and difficult. But you will have seen, here in this camp, that another way is possible. You will know that human beings can choose to treat each other with dignity even in times of war. Remember that. Build that." The assembly ended shortly after, but no one moved immediately. The weight of his words, the terrible truth of what they implied, settled over the room like a physical presence. That evening, Margaret wrote a letter. Not to family. She didn't know if her family was alive or where they might be. Instead, she wrote to the young American woman who had sat beside her in church, whose name she had learned was Sarah Miller, whose brother had died in France. "Dear Sarah, I do not know if I have the right to write to you, or if you will want to read this letter, but I feel I must try. Thank you for sharing your hymnal with me. Thank you for singing beside me despite your grief and your loss. Thank you for crying where I could see, for showing me that you are human and I am human and that this matters even when everything else has fallen apart. I did not know the full truth of what my government did. I suspected some things. I heard rumors, but I did not know, and I am ashamed that I did not try harder to know. I was afraid and I was young, and I told myself that my small part didn't matter. I was wrong. You showed me kindness I did not deserve. Your country has treated me with dignity I did not earn. I do not know how to repay this debt, but I will spend my life trying. When I return to Germany, I will remember that there is another way. I will remember that choosing humanity is possible even when it is difficult. Your brother died fighting against the evil my country became. I cannot give him back to you. I cannot undo that grief. But I can promise you that his death was not meaningless. Because of soldiers like him, because of people like you, I have seen what civilization actually means. I will remember. I will bear witness. I will choose differently. With gratitude and sorrow, Margaret Hoffman. She folded the letter carefully and addressed the envelope to Sarah Miller in care of the First Baptist Church, Battle Creek, Michigan. The Red Cross would see it delivered. August 1945. The repatriation process began in late summer. Margaret was processed out of Fort Custer on August 23, 1945, along with 73 other women bound for Germany. They would travel by train to New York, then by ship across the Atlantic, then into a country none of them recognized anymore. On her last morning, Anna helped her pack the few belongings she had accumulated. The 2 dresses she had been given, now worn but clean. A German-English dictionary she had bought with her work credits. 3 books from the library she had been allowed to keep. Letters from Sarah Miller and others. "Will you be all right?" Anna asked. "I don't know. Will you?" Anna smiled slightly. "I'm staying. My aunt's sponsorship came through last week. I'll be moving to Chicago in September to work as a private nurse for an elderly woman." She paused. "I'm going to become American. As soon as I'm eligible, I'll apply for citizenship. Won't you miss home?" "What home?" Anna's question was gentle but devastating. "Hamburg is rubble. My family is dead. Germany is occupied and divided and haunted by ghosts. I'll remember where I came from. I'll never forget that. But I'm going to help build something different." They embraced at the bus that would take Margaret to the train station. Around them, other women were saying goodbye to friends they might never see again, to a place that had been prison and sanctuary both. The journey back across the Atlantic took 12 days. Margaret stood at the ship's railing as the coast of Europe appeared on the horizon, gray and distant. She thought about hot showers and clean towels. She thought about chicken dinners and Sunday church services. She thought about Sergeant Williams, who didn't speak German but smiled when Margaret got her laundry work right. She thought about Colonel Morrison's speech about civilization as a choice. She thought about Sarah Miller, crying in a Michigan church, choosing kindness despite her grief. Germany would have to be rebuilt, not just its cities and roads and factories, but its soul. The evidence of what had been done in her country's name was undeniable now. The camps liberated, the photographs published, the testimonies recorded. The reckoning Morrison had warned about was beginning, and it would be terrible and necessary. But she had seen another way. She had lived, for 5 months, in a place where human dignity was treated not as a luxury but as a requirement. Where even enemies were fed, housed, allowed to worship, treated as human beings with intrinsic worth. The ship moved steadily toward Europe, toward an uncertain future, toward a country that would have to learn again what civilization meant. Margaret Hoffman stood at the railing and made a promise to herself, to Sarah Miller, to Anna, to all the women who had shown her a better way. She would remember. She would bear witness. She would choose differently, because that's what human dignity required of itself. The story of female German POWs in American camps during World War II is remarkably undertold in popular history. While exact numbers are debated, thousands of German women, mostly Wehrmacht auxiliaries, nurses, and civilian captives, were held in American facilities. Fort Custer in Michigan was one of several camps that housed female prisoners, and accounts from both prisoners and guards consistently described treatment that adhered to or exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. The church attendance program was real. Local congregations and communities near POW camps often opened their doors to prisoners, seeing it as both a humanitarian gesture and an opportunity to demonstrate American values. These encounters between former enemies in sacred spaces remain some of the most poignant examples of choosing human dignity even in wartime. For more untold stories from history, subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below.